to get started. The stragglers will come in, but we have enough to get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And again, our apologies. It's the way the House works. Votes take precedence over anything else, especially when there's confidence votes. So welcome to meeting 134 as we continue our review of the 5-year statutory review of copyright. We have with us today from the Canadian Anti-Counterfeiting Network, Lauren Lipkiss, Chair. From the Consumer Technology Association, Michael Petricone. Oh, there he is.
Yes.
Hi. On TV. On TV. You're on TV land. Senior Vice President, Government Affairs. From Creative Commons Canada, Kelsey Merkley, Representative. Hello. And from Open Media, Laura Tribe, Executive Director, and Marie Aspiazu. Aspiazu. Oh, that's close. That's close. So normally we have 7 minutes, and you can have up to 7 minutes, but the more time we have to ask questions would be great. So we're going to get into your presentations, and we will start with Mr. Lipkiss.
Good afternoon. Merci au comité de me donner l'occasion.
I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to speak with you here today.
Network is made up of intellectual property owners, service providers, certification bodies, legal firms, industry associations, and others dedicated to help prevent counterfeiting fraud and copyright piracy in Canada. Almost every one of the members of CACN have their own day jobs. My own background is as a partner in a law firm based in Toronto, covering intellectual property brand protection issues for over 80 brands across Canada. I've been doing so since 1985, and I've lived through the changes in trademark and copyright law during that time, and most recently have been intricately involved in the Border Enforcement Request for Assistance program in Canada. I spend my days, and as my wife is fond of saying many other times as well, trying to protect brand owners from the proliferation of illegal, dangerous, counterfeit, as well as pirated products that find their way into Canada and online. While we can all agree that there's no single solution to address copyright infringement or the sale of counterfeit product, I hope we can also agree that it is in all of our best interests to provide rights holders with the tools that have been proven to be the most effective at reducing copyright infringement around the world in order to address infringement in Canada. Unfortunately, Canada has rarely been a leader around the world in these areas. Fortunately, we can now look to and learn from the experience of others in these areas. I want to make it clear that I'm here to comment and speak about the products, sites and services that contain and sell intellectual properties, copyrights and trademarks. Any and every legitimate, authorized, authentic product either is or can be counterfeited or pirated. And a look at what we've seen in Canada proves the point. You've heard from several knowledgeable people during these hearings about the harm to our creative industries through illegally making available music and motion pictures. The CACN supports the position taken by Bell Rogers, the Canadian Media Producers Association, and the Motion Picture Association in Canada, and others on the need to allow right holders to obtain injunctions, including site blocking and de-indexing orders, and against intermediaries whose services are used to infringe copyright. But the focus of CACN, and my purpose here today, is on what can be done to protect against products, physical goods, merchandise, items that everyday Canadians are making or importing or exporting or buying online or buying on Canadian streets, buying on stores. These products bear copyright-protected works. They also sometimes bear registered Canadian trademarks. Sometimes they contain both copyrights and trademarks. I have seen counterfeit products, sites, and services that make available to Canadians medications, food, contact lenses, electrical products, including extension cords and circuit breakers, some of which have been found in Canadian hospitals, automotive parts, batteries, smartphone chargers and cords, cellular devices, shampoos, makeup, tools, fertilizer, furniture, luxury goods, apparel, you name it. If it's being made, it's being counterfeited or copied. At CACN, we therefore support needed amendments to the Copyright Act, and I've mentioned the injunctive relief and the safe harbor provisions, but the third thing that we've been asking for is a simplified procedure to deal with the products that I've just mentioned. So we would like the introduction of a simplified procedure under Section 44, which relates to the CBSA's RFA program, Request for Assistance program, so that it is clear that border officers are authorized and mandated to not only detain these products coming into Canada, but to seize them. Right now, they detain them. We're asking that they be allowed to seize them, as is the case around the world, and destroy them without the need for a judicial proceeding, which is the hallmark of the existing program. Our organization also hopes that one day Canada will have a meaningful intellectual property rights coordination center that can intake information obtained by law enforcement, by customs and related agencies, as well as members of the public and intellectual property rights holders under one roof to deal with the proper utilization of resources dedicated to dealing with this ever-increasing problem in Canada. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you for your kind attention.
We're going to move to Consumer Technology Association from Washington, D.C., Mr. Petricone.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Consumer Technology Association, I'm pleased to participate in the committee's review of Canada's Copyright Act. CTA represents the 321 billion Canadian and U.S. consumer technology industries, comprising more than 2,200 Canadian and U.S. companies, of which 80% are small businesses and startups. CTA also owns and produces CES, the International Trade Show for Consumer Technology. I am also honored to appear before you because as a child I lived in Oakville, Ontario, and I have many happy memories of growing up in your wonderful country. In our written brief, CTA urged that this review's outcome should be one that makes Canadian and international works, services, and technologies more accessible in Canada and abroad. We expressed concern over proposals to move in the opposite direction by imposing new constraints on technologies, devices, and local international service providers. These innovations have helped Canadians to lead the world economy. This review should enhance rather than limit Canada's contribution. So we have made the following recommendations. First, maintain and enhance limitations on exceptions, such as the doctrines of fair dealing and fair use. Number two, avoid unique impositions on online service providers, or OSPs, that would hobble Canada's contribution to international discourse and result in a loss of service in Canada. And number three, reject attempts to oversee the design of technologies and devices, or define classes of technology or device to be subjected to some sort of levy. First, and finally, with respect to copyright terms, we have argued against the extension of copyright terms, believing the focus should be on creating new works and directions. When we see the USMCA's contrary result is unfortunate and hope the effect can be mitigated in your law through exceptions, limitations, and more discretion with respect to fair dealing. In terms of fair use, having accepted the U.S. provisions on copyright term and the U.S. policy on circumvention of technical measures, Canada should also balance these with appropriate limitations and exceptions of the sort that mitigate their impact on U.S. law. Canada took constructive steps in 2012 to recognize best practices and fair dealing. These practices promote research, study, criticism, and they recognize the value of satire, parody, and user-generated content. While a full fair use regime would perhaps better serve the present dynamic environment, perhaps Canada's fair dealing regime can be made more flexible and more adaptable. The strict application of a code-based regime such as fair dealing cannot account for new technologies and new uses. One step harmonious with U.S. law would be to add the word such as, which appears in the U.S. Code Section 107. This would allow Canada's courts to keep up with the reasonable and customary practices of businesses and users. The fair use doctrine, developed by courts as an iteration of the U.S. First Amendment principles, has continued to adapt even after being codified. Its application by the Supreme Court in the 1984 Sony Betamax case opened the door to personal communications, commerce, and the internet. In our industry, we refer to this as the Magna Carta of the consumer technology industry. Fair use has also been the basis of informal codes of best practices, which I know exist in Canada as well in many areas. Internationally, the ability to quote and criticize has been important for democracy and innovation. CTA believes that the US, Canada, and Europe should encourage these values both at home and abroad. In terms of technical measures, Canada did follow the US lead in making circumvention of technical measures illegal, but in this area as well has not provided corresponding limitations and exceptions. As the US Register of Copyrights ruled last week in its DMCA Section 1201 recommendations, lawful user exceptions are particularly necessary in the diagnosis, maintenance, and repair of modern cars, farm equipment, and other devices, because embedded software has replaced analog circuitry and mechanical parts. So under the new regulations, US farmers will no longer have to worry about the legality of getting expert assistance to repair a tractor or a harvester during a short northern growing season. After exhaustive study and commentary from CTA and others, the registers found that such exceptions can and should be implemented without putting creative expression at risk. This is a step forward that Canada should also consider. Even though fair use is not seen by US courts as a defense to DMCA 1201, it is a metric used by the Register of Copyrights in evaluating exception petitions. Limitations based on such considerations would serve Canada well. An issue on which Canada and the USMCA now lead together in a positive direction is the recognition of safe harbors for online service providers hosting user-generated content. As we noted in our brief, studies have shown the impairment of safe harbor protections would have the greatest impact on small and local OSP entrants that don't have the resources to do mass filtering. We recognize, however, that no regime is perfect. In our brief, we urge the consideration of measures to address spamming activities under Canada's notice and notice regime. As in the case of technical measures, both the constraints and necessary relief from them are now moving targets that are best aimed in tandem. In terms of site blocking, this is a measure long opposed by CTA, which has been raised again and by participants in your review. When drafted in the US as part of the proposed SOPA-PIPA legislation 6 years ago, such proposals collapsed under expert scrutiny and public outrage. In the Canadian context, such measures would have the additional drawback of depriving entrepreneurs and users of access to sites available in other portions of North America and beyond. CTA also opposes recent proposals for new levies and design constraints on products and services. Such measures become distortive of technologies and markets and eventually are made irrelevant by technology change, except for lingering lawsuits. In our experience, device levies do not satisfy right holders' needs to respond to technical change, and again, quickly become outmoded. In terms of copyright term extension, CTA views the public domain as a valuable resource for cultural creativity and for future innovation. We see Canada's agreement in the USMCA to add 20 years to terms to match the United States as unfortunate, but we would hope that in your review, through measures that we have suggested, you can mitigate the consequences of contracting the public domain. It has been suggested in the US that some formality should apply in the last 20 years of protection to avoid orphan work problems, and Canada may also consider such a solution. So in conclusion, the pace of innovation is often faster than anybody's ability to legislate responsibly. Even the pace of a 5-year review cannot anticipate or keep up with the changes that have replaced mechanical devices with digital ones, and then replaced many of those devices with online services. Canada recommends that this committee put a premium on creativity and innovation and be skeptical of impositions on digital services and digital devices and online services. On behalf of CTA, I thank you for this opportunity to participate.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Creative Commons Canada. Ms. Merkley, you have up to 7 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land that we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. My name is Kelsey Merkley. I'm here as a public citizen, a representative of Creative Commons Canada. We are part of a global nonprofit organization established in 2001 with 26 country chapters worldwide, each working with artists, librarians, scientists, filmmakers, and photographers. We create, maintain, and promote the Creative Commons license suite. These are globally recognized copyright licenses that are free to use that allow for creators to choose how their works are reused under simple, standard terms. Globally, the CC licenses have been applied to over 1.4 billion works around the world. What's powerful to me about 1.4 billion works is that individuals made an active decision to share 1.4 billion times. If you have used one of Wikipedia's 40 million articles, downloaded a photo from Flickr, watched videos on YouTube, you have come in contact with one of our licenses, both in a commercial or non-commercial context. Some examples of our licenses in the world include Lumen Learning, which permits commercial use under an open license to over 280 institutions in the U.S. This year alone, they have had over 4 million visits to their open education content website per month. In multiple instances, Lumen has demonstrated that their supported OER offering eliminates the performance gap between low socioeconomic students and higher socioeconomic students. Here in Canada, the globally recognized leader in open textbooks, BC Campus, has saved economically scarce students in British Columbia over $9 million in textbook savings through Canadian-created open license textbooks. Canadian science fiction and young adult author Cory Doctorow chooses to license many of his works under a CC non-commercial license, which grants access to everyone as long as they don't sell his creativity. Researchers at Mars in the Structural Genomics Consortium, Aled Edwards and Rachel Harding, have used the most open license, CC BY attribution, to accelerate the pace of scientific discovery by opening up their lab notes to other researchers around the world without restriction. The New York Public Library, the Met, the Rijksmuseum, and most recently, Europeana, all share works under a Creative Commons license to allow for their collections to travel globally. We advocate and offer advice to governments, institutions who want to use open licenses to help their citizens access content. We've offered advice to the European Space Agency, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Department of Education, and the European Commission. All of them have used CC licenses in their publicly funded works to benefit to the public. Here in Canada, Quebec was the first government worldwide to adopt the CC 4.0 license to all open data released by the province. I'm grateful to the committee for the opportunity to offer a few thoughts and suggestions as you continue your review for potential changes to the Copyright Act. First, the public domain is harmed by copyright term extension. Fundamentally, we believe that all creativity builds upon the past, and that promoting and protecting a robust public domain is central to our mission. Why? Because works in the public domain may be used by anyone without restriction. Works in the public domain become the raw material for creativity and innovation. The committee should not reopen the terms discussed under the Copyright Act. If the term is to be extended 20 years, then significant consideration should be given to other permitted uses and clearer, fair dealings to mitigate its impact on education, creativity, and innovation. Number 2, permit creators to reclaim their rights. We endorse Brian Adams' recommendation to this committee for Canadian creators to reclaim their rights from 25 years after death to 25 years after assignment. 3, to protect fair dealing, especially for education. Fair dealing for education is crucial to ensure that copyright fulfills its ultimate purpose of promoting essential aspects of the public interest. 4, the right to read should be the right to mine. Considering the massive potential for novel research discoveries, advancements in AI, machine learning, and Canadian innovation, the Copyright Act should clarify that the right to read is the right to mine. It should ensure that all of these non-expressive, non-consumption uses, like text and data mining, are included under the fair dealing framework, or broadly supported under other legal measures. 5, improve open access to government-funded education, research, and data. The sharings of works under Creative Commons licenses is a legitimate exercise of copyright and should be the norm for all publicly funded resources, such as research, education materials, government-collected data, and cultural works. Canada should reform Crown copyright regime because all Canadians should have the right to access and reuse, without restriction, work produced by their government. Canada should place these materials directly into the public domain at the time of publishing. I hope that your questions will allow me the opportunity to speak more to the public value and scientific opportunity of open access publishing. Gratitude is at the center of the work that we do, so I'll end here with thanks for you for extending the invitation for me here today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now to Open Media, Laura Tribe.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. I would also like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. My name is Laura Tribe, and I'm the Executive Director of Open Media, and we are a community-based organization of over 500,000 supporters working to keep the internet open, affordable, and surveillance-free. I am joined today by my colleague, Maria Espiazu. Let me be clear in stating that Canada has a strong and balanced copyright system, but the recent NAFTA renegotiations have struck a significant blow to this balance and to Canada's position as a leader on copyright. We hope that through this review process, we can amend the Copyright Act to improve access to content and restore balance to this system. By allowing an international trade agreement to set a significant portion of Canada's copyright agenda, the government not only accepted troubling amendments, including extended copyright terms by 20 years, but actively undermined this ongoing consultation. Over the past year, a number of extremely problematic levies, taxes, have been put forward as a means to help compensate Canadian creators. We simply cannot afford the following proposals that will increase the costs of digital connectivity. First, an iPod tax. This recycled idea would tax all smartphone devices sold in Canada to compensate for alleged music copying. This idea ignores the decrease in private music copying with the rise of subscription-based services, and that people use smartphones for a wide variety of reasons far beyond music consumption, let alone illegal music consumption. Next, the Netflix tax. This proposal would reverse the CRTC's digital media exemption order and see over-the-top, or OTT, providers required to comply to the same Canadian content regulations as broadcasters. This fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the internet and would actually target all OTT services of all sizes, not just Netflix. And then the internet tax, a requirement for internet service providers to pay into CanCon funding as Canadian broadcasters do. Unfortunately, we know these prices will be passed on to customers. Canadians already pay some of the highest internet prices in the world for subpar service. This idea has been rejected by nearly 40,000 internet users in Open Media's community. And now, a copyright tax. Just recently, we heard a proposal for all internet use over 15 gigabytes per month per household to be taxed. This is based on the misguided claim that any internet usage over 15 gigabytes must be due to streaming content, and that streaming content, even if users pay for it legally, means users should pay more to compensate creators. Creators should be adequately compensated, but these are not the solutions to make this happen. As Open Media community member Bill put it, quote, "I'm a small business owner and use a lot of bandwidth for online meetings and other related activities. An internet tax would kill my business, putting 6 people out of work," end quote. We cannot afford to further increase our digital divide and the price of the internet in Canada. A fast, affordable internet connection is essential. Separately, let's talk sales tax. Charging federal sales tax to online content providers is often conflated with the above proposals, but is critically distinct. Should the federal government choose to apply HST to international online services, those taxes should rightly be charged and remitted to the government, then allocated into the general budget as the government sees fit, including as funding for arts, culture, and creators.
Bell Canada's Fair Play website blocking proposal is one of the most dangerous suggestions we've heard yet. This would inevitably censor legitimate content and speech online and violate net neutrality protections, all without court oversight. And it would set a dangerous precedent for other censorship proposals in the future. Experts have pointed out the expensive and problematic technical aspects of implementing these censorship interventions. Additionally, near 100,000 Open Media supporters spoke out against Bell Canada's Fair Play website blocking proposal when it was tabled both during NAFTA and before the CRTC. In the words of our community member Ryan, quote, "Arbitrarily allowing website blocking and website takedowns will result in a severe reduction of civil rights and political freedoms, as companies and organizations can decide to remove websites they don't like, regardless if any terms were violated. We have a strong legal system where the accused is deemed innocent until proven guilty. Let the courts handle the matters, since they are subject to public scrutiny and inquiry by law," end quote. Additional dangerous proposals making their way to Canada in light of the EU's proposed copyright directive are the link tax and mandatory content filtering algorithms. The link tax would copyright the snippets of text that usually accompany links, often used as previews to help internet users find content online. Requiring aggregators to pay for content just to be able to promote it actually harms content creators by reducing the discoverability of their content. But it also entrenches the largest content aggregators, such as Facebook and Google, by making the cost for new entrants even higher. This proposal has already been implemented and proven a failure in both Germany and Spain. Content filtering requirements would turn online platforms into the copyright police, forcing online platforms to implement mechanisms to identify and block materials believed to infringe copyright before being posted. Similar to YouTube's multi-million-dollar content ID system, it won't come cheap. And as we know, still result in false positives and inevitably result in the takedown of legitimate content. We have outlined a number of concerning proposals on the table, but we believe some simple amendments can be made to the system to help restore balance. At the very least, the government should maintain the current fair dealing list, including education, parody, and satire. Additionally, explicitly adding transformative use would be greatly beneficial. Ideally, Canada will adopt broader fair use provisions, similar to those in the US. We also urge the government to eliminate crown copyright. As Open Media has previously stated, Canada's notice and notice system is a fair regime for addressing alleged copyright infringements. However, the government should provide content guidelines for notices that prevent threats or demands for settlements. Open Media has been advocating on copyright issues for over the past 6 years. Our community's lengthy efforts include 5 years of campaigning against the secretive Trans-Pacific Partnership and its dangerous IP chapter, our digital future, a crowdsourced agenda for free expression, a positive vision for sharing and creativity online serves from over 40,000 people, over 50,000 people urging Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs to stand up for citizens' digital rights in NAFTA, and over 2,500 submissions to this committee's consultation via Open Media's online tool at letstalkcopyright.ca. Before coming here today, we asked our community what we should say to you. We hope their voices are well represented. In conclusion, we ask the committee to address the needs of the people these rules affect the most. Everyday people who depend on a balanced copyright regime for their daily activities. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for your presentations. Just so we're all on the same page, we can extend up until 6 o'clock. I know some of our guests may have to leave, and that's fine. So before we start question, Mr. Lloyd, you want to read into the record a notice of motion?
Yep, just a quick motion. That the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology, pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, undertake a study of no less than 6 meetings to investigate and make recommendations on the impact of carbon pricing on Canadian industry's global competitiveness. And that's just a notice, no debate on that, so at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. That is correct. No debate at this time. We're going to move to our first line of questioning. It goes to, disappeared. So, killing me here. Oh, there it is. Mr. Sheehan, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our presenters for that very important discussion. I'm going to start with Lauren first from the Canadian Anti-Counterfeiting Network. In your testimony, you had given quite a few examples that seem to be more related to trademark or patent specific. Do you have any copyright specific examples that you could share?
I believe that every example I gave has a copyright aspect.
Okay. Just delve into
The
that.
fact is that physical goods
Yep.
bear various kinds of intellectual property. One example is medication. Medication can come in across our borders, for example, or be sold in our stores in pill form without any packaging. If you look just at the medication, it's probably protected by patent laws. There are patents in that medication. You would probably have to know something about the medication itself to tell if it's infringing the patent. The packaging itself may have logos, names, and designs on the packaging. Very often, when customs sees product coming into the country, they know by the packaging before they ever get to the product whether there's a problem with it and whether it's potentially counterfeit or pirated. What we've seen with things like pharmaceutical packaging and packaging of toys, packaging of shampoos, packaging of the things that I've mentioned is that the counterfeiter, the pirate, may copy the actual work, the copyrighted work on the outside of that package and take off the trademark name, not realizing that it's protected by copyright as well. Okay. So there's the example. And even something as simple as automotive parts can have logos, designs on them that are actually protected by copyright. I hope that responds to that.
That helps a lot. That delves more deeply into it, and you certainly went down into an area that in reading on the subject, the Mounties stated that counterfeiting has increased in the past 7 years in Canada, from 38.1 million in 2012 up from 7.7 million in 2005. So, what percentage of these items infringe copyright? Do you have that number, or would you have a ballpark figure? And are there certain sectors of the cultural industries that are hit harder than others, more the cultural industries?
Nobody has the number. Anybody who gives a number is guessing. We do know that worldwide, some recent studies, one done by the OECD, and I'm sure that's been shown to you, those are about the most accurate numbers we're going to get. Nobody knows what it is in Canada, but I'll come back to one example that I think is extremely telling. You read the numbers from the RCMP. The RCMP has not really had any pirating or counterfeit cases in respect of consumer goods in over 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. But when they did, there was the commanding officer in the Toronto area wanted to see how much counterfeit or pirated goods were coming in through the Toronto airport. And what he did was, at the time, in the entire year, the most amount of counterfeit that had come into Canada was in the $30 million range. So he wanted to see, well, what would happen if we took 6 months and we answered all the calls that we got from CBSA? How much product would there be? In 6 months, there was over $70 million in counterfeit just from Toronto. And it was everything you could think of. It was, when I say anything and everything, products that we'd not even seen counterfeited were being seized through the RCMP. Since that time, and that was Project O Scorpion, and that was, I believe, in 2012, 2013, since that time there's been almost no seizures at the border by the RCMP or by Customs. So I think that's pretty telling. If you look for it, you're going to find it. And we find the same thing in the marketplace. We just, sorry, I didn't know if you wanted more examples.
That's okay. My next thank you very much for that. The CTA, first of all, nice to see you again. We met when we were doing our broadband study, and we went down to Washington and met with some of your members there. Question for you is, from your perspective, does the Copyright Act restrict the development and use of current or emerging technologies? And if so, to whose advantage? And can you provide the committee with a sense of how new and emerging technologies could offer both opportunities or hinder the enforcement of copyright?
What keeps me awake at night is that we'll have some well-intended but overly broad regulation that will prevent new innovations, new and socially beneficial innovations from hitting the market. What we tend to find in technology is that new technologies come on the market and they are used by consumers in ways that are not originally contemplated. In my testimony, I talked about the Sony Betamax controversy, where Sony introduced the Betamax, which was a device that allowed people to record television shows. And the movie industry took it to court and ended up in the United States Supreme Court, where it was declared a legal product by one vote and then became a very popular product. The irony is that what the movie industry was concerned about was the record button. But what consumers found valuable in the Betamax was the play button. And what that did was start a brand new industry in pre-recorded media, like such as compact discs and DVDs, which ended up making up the majority of the movie industry's revenues, some years out. So had they been successful in shutting down that technology, they would have also shut down one of their biggest revenue streams. And you see that a great deal in technology, right, where it goes in ways that you don't expect. The general trend is that new technologies open up new distribution platforms, allow access to new consumer groups, and allow new ways to monetize, as you're seeing now on the internet with the growth of streaming music. So our advice is always to be very light-handed on the regulation of new technologies because you're not sure what kind of opportunities, in terms of creative opportunities or economic opportunities, you may be inadvertently foreclosing.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Lloyd. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you to all the witnesses today. And my first line of questioning is going to be for yourself, Mr. Lipkiss. You know, a lot of things we've been dealing with at this committee, we've been talking to authors, music creators. These are really intangible things, like, you know, with the digital sphere. And a lot of things that you were talking about in your testimony are really physical things that could be crossing the borders. And I was wondering, you know, you had talked about effective tools. And does your organization have any effective tools that you would recommend for dealing with things exclusively in this digital sphere? Like, what would be these effective tools?
Well, one of the things that we recommended is, as you know, is the simplified procedure, which is in relation to the physical goods. But I'm not sure that I have a good answer for you in relation to something that would just deal with the intangible.
Okay.
The intangible that we're talking about, even in a physical good, is the intangible of the work itself. The work itself finds its way into the physical good.
Yeah.
So we're still there on the creative side.
Yeah.
It's just that it's put onto something that is sold as a physical good.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. And then my next question is going to be for yourself, Ms. Merkley. You know, I was in BC as a student when they actually unveiled the Creative Commons. The BC Liberal government did that there. And as a student, like, it seemed like a really good resource. But can you kind of further explain to me how authors and creators are compensated under a Creative Commons license? Like, how does that work there?
So there is no difference in how they are compensated, especially in are we speaking in the textbooks?
Yeah, specifically, yeah.
Someone has to pay for a textbook to be created, and often the ways the textbooks are created now are either through institutional grants or through the university themselves. There's also a branch of study called open pedagogy, where they work with the students to create the textbook themselves. And so when people talk about the $9 million, we hear publishers say, well, we just lost $9 million, but the rate of inflation of textbooks has outstripped the cost of any student's feasible responsibility. We're looking at textbook costs that are over $1,000 per textbook. And that's one textbook for one course for one term. These costs are just unreasonable.
So, but how do they, like, the question is, how are authors compensated under Creative Commons? Like, are they not compensated?
They can be compensated for Creative Commons. The Creative Commons does not mean that the book cannot be charged for. A book can still be charged. It's just the creation of the work is still is made available for free. Cory Doctorow, who makes money on his books, exactly the same model as a textbook. He creates the book, and then the book is then sold. The physical book is sold. He sells ebook copies, and he makes a PDF available for anyone for free. He is able to make more money as a result because his goods, his product is available more widely, and people are more likely to purchase the book because a PDF is less readable on a ebook, on a Kindle, on an e-reader, and it's the same thing with textbooks.
So, like, and I appreciate, like, there's some authors, you know, who, like, are able to, like, have a wide audience and able to leverage that and give away some things for free. But, like, we've had a number of authors come before this committee, and it's been, I wouldn't say quite unanimous, but overwhelming that these authors are asking for stronger copyright protection. They're asking for term extension because we've seen statistically that their revenues are going down as authors. And then we're hearing people say, well, these books are the raw resources that are used for future creativity. But these are the creators, and they're coming here and telling us, like, please protect our works because we can't make a living off of it. And if they stop creating these works, then we're really losing a really important value-added industry. So what do you have to say?
But I think we're seeing, I mean, with Wikipedia and with other open content creations, there is an additional industry that is being created that allows for these, for work to be created and for people to still, I would encourage these authors to be able to look at different revenue streams. We are in a new digital era. The old models simply are not working the way that they used to. It is time for new and different business models.
If we're talking about, like, a medical textbook, though, are you arguing that Wikipedia is a viable
Wikipedia
replacement?
is written by experts and is accessible. There are many examples of textbooks that are written that are crowd and community written by medical community that are licensed under a Creative Commons license. that are not created. One of the big challenges with Wikipedia is actually that it is currently being written at a too advanced level and is not being written at an encyclopedic level.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. My next question, how much time do I have left?
In seconds.
Okay, well then, thank you.
But we'll get back to you. Mr. Massey, you have 5 minutes.
It was going to be a great 10 seconds, too. I'll start with Mr. Lipkus. Actually, I had a piece of legislation that improved CBSA detainment, actually seize and destroy. It was on invasive carp. Before, in the past, when carp came over into Canada, it had to be tested to make sure it was dead. They have like so-called zombie-like characteristics, so it was packed in ice, could live up to 24 hours. So long story short, my bill, which the Conservatives stole and implemented, which was great, because they did it through regulation, was that they have to be eviscerated. So we don't have to have people come and check to make sure they're alive. But basically, if you come into Canada with invasive carp, they got to be gutted, and there's no thing in that. Does your suggestions the same thing? Can it go through regulation? Maybe if you want to give a little bit, in terms of detain, seize, and destroy. I could see maybe detain and seize, but destroy or sending back probably could be through regulation. But destroy might require some legislation.
Well, sending it back just adds to the problem, but
Right. It doesn't, not for our country in terms of, like, I've seen stuff get into hospitals. Like we used to have, I was part of a parliamentary group that actually for counterfeiting and piracy, and stopping it getting into our country is a progress. Sending it back to where it came from is now their problem. So I would disagree on that, because stopping is one thing and then having to be responsible to destroy it is another. So I guess that's where I'm focused on is that why not just send it back? And it's probably a regulatory change versus destroying, which is probably a legislative change.
well, leaving aside statistically what happens, I can tell you anecdotally that products that were destined for Canada and were sent back have found their way back into Canada. That is something that happens. Statistically, I can't tell you how often, but counterfeiters are quite aggressive, and they will find a way to get it back in. Yes, sometimes they'll bring it to another country, but if they want to get it here because they have a customer here who wants it, they'll get it back in through another port. Yeah.
But we could, with a trade agreement, we could simply, to that port that it came from, we could simply send it back, notify that we're not accepting these because they're actually counterfeit, we suspect, and there's counterfeit items and they're dangerous and so forth. We can send them back to countries of importation. Most countries have trade agreements or WTO standing with ourselves, so we can actually do all those things. So I guess I really want to focus on this, is that because a regulatory change means that we don't need legislation changed, which is probably very not likely to happen right now with this time frame, whereas regulatory change could be done in a matter of weeks.
Clearly, any regulatory change that makes it easier to prevent the importation of counterfeit or pirated products into Canada is welcome. Even if it creates another problem, which I've just mentioned, it's still better.
Yeah.
It's still better than what we have.
And I'm not just waiting from that. I'm not trying to be argumentative on it. It's just that it's what we can get done here. So that's why I want to, and I would ask maybe perhaps questions to the researchers. Could we find out whether or not what's being suggested here is a regulatory change in terms of, or I'd like to know, or legislative changes, either in terms of detain, seize, or destroy counterfeit items coming into Canada?
Could I make a comment about
of course.
The destruction part? Because and I don't know if it's a regulatory change or not, but if with the existing legislation, if the importer, there's a 10-day period of notice given to both the importer and to the rights owner, saying these goods are now in the country or are on their way into the country. You, Mr. Rights holder, have 10 days to bring an action, or else we're going to be releasing the goods in some way. And the importer is given 10 days notice to say these goods are suspected of being counterfeit. In the cases we're finding right now, the importer either doesn't respond or says, I didn't order those goods. If part of the process was an abandonment situation, which is done with other goods in Canada, that in similar situations, if after 10 days the importer does not respond or responds and says they didn't order these goods, then why can't we destroy them right away? Why is the government paying to continue to store these goods? They could be destroyed immediately.
Yeah, and that's why I want the legal advice as to you can't just, and I don't want to use up all my time on this, but I think what you're asking for is a far more complicated process for something we can have a simpler solution in the medium to short term. I'm not disagreeing in terms of responsibility of it, but there's low-hanging fruit in your situation, in my opinion, that you're advocating, and public health benefits as well too, especially with more drugs and so forth that are now getting into counterfeiting and so forth, and a public health thing. So there's, at any rate, so I'm going to quickly go over to open media with regards to your question and statement, I think, about with regards to undermining the consultations with the extension of the trade agreement. Perhaps you can enlighten us a little bit more on that. That's one of the things that has dramatically shifted during these hearings is a trade agreement in principle. We can debate whether it's going to get passed or not, but at the same time we have agreed that that's changing the context. And please.
Absolutely. I think this committee has been tasked with undertaking a review of the Copyright Act, and what we've seen is an international trade agreement that is largely focused on physical goods and how they pass across borders, and providing some of the answers to the questions that this committee is asking. And so if that trade agreement is passed and does become ratified, one of the concerns that we have is this committee has asked for what people think on these issues and how people feel about these issues. And at the end of the day, some of those answers have been deemed irrelevant by this trade agreement if it goes through. And so that's a concern that we have about the democratic process of both how these trade agreements are being negotiated. Within the NAFTA consultation negotiations, the results of that own consultation were never released to the public. And then within that, again, we're having this consultation here, and we still don't know what the NAFTA consultation said. That deal was then moved forward, and ultimately, all of these deals, all of these negotiations, all of these consultations are supposed to be for the best interest of people in Canada, and we're not certain where their voices are going, how they're being heard. So that's our concern with that being sort of a sideshow to this consultation. Maybe that's the wrong word, but we're in a tandem.
Thank you. You had less than 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't have been a good 10 seconds anyways. So.
You're like two minutes over,
yeah.
But that's okay. we like to give you your time. Mr. Graham, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to go to Mr. Lipkiss on questions of why you'd want your toy labels protected for 70 years. But before I get to that, I'm going to give Mr. Lametti a quick question.
Thank you again for Mr. Lipkiss. I mean, one of the fundamental principles of copyright law is copyright in the book doesn't mean ownership of the book. Right? Physical object versus copyright. Most of the examples you gave were patent or trademark. I think you would definitely agree with that, with copyright coming in at the end. Now, if there's a copyright violation on the label, why should it give you the right to seize or even destroy the physical object?
Well, that's an excellent question. In fact, what happens in practice right now is they seize the package because the package that they've used to advertise, which is illegal to be advertising that, if they can take the product, if the product is authentic, for example, it doesn't show.
But then you're back in the trademark and patent again.
No. If that package.
The copyright only applies to the design of the label.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't apply to the authenticity.
Exactly. And what happens, you're 100% right. And so the product itself can flow through. No one's taking a position on the product. Unfortunately, very often when the packaging is an infringement, very often the product is counterfeit as well.
You seem to be pushing for ability to seize or destroy the product based on copyright. If that's the case,
if I said that,
misleading us.
No, if I said that, that's only predicated on the product being counterfeit. We've seen toys, for example,
under patent or trademark.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I have questions for everybody, but I'll go to the more interesting ones right now. You both talked about replacing Crown copyright or getting rid of it altogether, which I think is a very poorly known subject by most people. Just briefly, can you explain how you understand Crown copyright and should it go to public domain, or should there be, for example, a Creative Commons license for Crown material? Whoever wants to go.
It's okay. I think it's probably across the board. I'll let Kelsey look up her notes. I mean, I think exactly what that looks like in implementation. I'm not the expert to tell you exactly what that solution looks like, but I think that what we are advocating for is more content in the public domain. And if these are publicly funded materials created by public service and the Canadian government, then those are things that we would expect to be put into the public domain in one form or another. I'll let Kelsey speak to the Creative Commons aspect of that.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I echo those comments, is that works that are paid for by the public are already the public's and should be easy and accessible to use and to be able to build, innovate, create on top of. We know that governments such as Australia retain the copyright but publish works openly under a Creative Commons CC BY license, which means that the government would still continue to get attribution for the work that is being done, which allows for broad reuse with minimum restriction. And we know that the European Commission has recommended open licenses, the CC BY and the CC0. CC0 is a license that will apply public domain immediately to the license. And that's for publishing for open data collected by public sectors and bodies within Europe.
Kelsey, if I may, you made a comment earlier, right to read should be right to mine. That's a great line. I haven't heard that one before. So should we differentiate in any way between a person reading something and a machine reading something?
That's a great question. I think that there is ample opportunity for those there is differences between a machine reading a document and a human reading the document. The speed and access and ease that a machine can read is vastly different than one human.
Do you have comments on that as well? You seem to.
I was just going to say that I agree. The way in which the information is processed by an artificial intelligence device and a human being is different, and I believe that the outcome of allowing for this exception for text and data mining would be incredibly beneficial for Canada's AI industry, which is something that the government had in mind when they set out the budget this year.
Mm-hmm. You guys mentioned fair play. I guess it boils down to this question. Should companies be allowed to be vertically integrated in the media market?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Should companies be allowed to be vertically
vertical integration?
Vertical integration. Does vertical integration of media markets pose a threat to?
I think what we've seen in Fair Play is a clear indication of the difference between those that are vertically integrated and those that are not. And when you look at the companies in the media industry that have come out to support Fair Play, they have clearly been those that have content interests, not those of ISPs. And independent internet service providers that are strictly focused on providing telecommunication services have not come out with the same position, because it is a huge burden on ISPs to be doing this and not the business that they're in. And so that's where we really do see the difficulty of the deeply vertically integrated market that our telecom and media conglomerates have.
Appreciate it. Dan's going to cut me off, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we're going to move to Mr. Carey. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you very much,
and you
Mr.
have 5
Chair,
minutes.
for being here. I actually used to be on this committee about 10 years ago, and 10 years ago we were talking about copyright. Brian was here. Brian, I thought we had this figured out. Like, what's happened when I left? It's been the longest study.
I have a trifecta because you all worked on it.
You know what, though? It's exciting times. We have this new USMCA, and I was wondering, Mr. Petricone, is that how you say your name?
Petricone, yes.
Petricone. I was wondering if you could comment on this new deal. It actually will be coming to probably International Trade Committee, the one I do sit on. I'd really like your insight on the new USMCA.
From our perspective, it is a good deal. It contains important elements for the innovation industry. For example, limitations on liability for internet platforms that host third-party content, without which the internet, which has been a fundamental part of the ability of American internet companies to exist and thrive. Because otherwise, from a legal and liability standpoint, it just wouldn't work. So that is in the agreement, and that is good. And also, limitation, no data localization rules, that is good. A limitation on duties for digitally purchased goods, that is good for all of our industries. We are, in terms of Canada, we would not have been in favor of the extension of copyright terms. We believe the focus should be on incentivizing new works, and that the public domain is a hugely fertile and dynamic area for new innovation. It's a building block for new innovation. It should be protected and extended. And also, we would have been pleased with a specific mention of fair use in the agreement, because we believe that fair use is important. But on the whole, we believe it is a good agreement for the creative industry and a good agreement for the innovation sector.
Great, thank you very much. And Ms. Tribe, could you comment, please?
Sorry, I missed that last part of it.
That just on the new USMCA. I was wondering if you'd be able to comment on what you think of that deal.
I mean, we have concerns around some of the elements contained within not just the IP chapter, but the digital trade chapter. But I think that our fundamental concern with USMCA, as I was starting to get to earlier, is that this is a deal that we have no indication included the voices of Canadians in it. People feel very strongly in support of or against the deal itself based on the issues that they care about. And as an organization that is committed to the future of our digital economy and Canada's internet, it's very concerning to see issues that are very complicated and technical, like digital trade, like intellectual property, being negotiated in the same way that we are trading between cows and milk and chickens. And that is not to discredit any of those issues. They are all very important, but they are very different from the type of issues that we're looking at in digital trade. And that's the concern that we have with this being negotiated as a part of a larger trade deal where we're making concessions across the board. And to us, it feels like the IP chapter was one of the concessions that was made as a part of this larger negotiation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Maybe a question to the panel up in front of me here, because I believe in your presentations and your history, you do advocate for stronger users' rights. I remember 10 years ago it was a balance between the users and the creators, and I remember creators back then were struggling, and the stats are out there. Now I think in 2010, writers and authors, their income was like $29,700, and in 2015 it was actually down to $28,000. So it seems that they're struggling, and if you're advocating for stronger users' rights, is it actually the time that we should be advocating for stronger users' rights when we're actually seeing employment income for creators actually dropping and they're struggling?
I'll start with that, and then
Sure.
If there's other comments. I'm a library member. I'm a librarian by background. I'm a strong user of Toronto Public Library. I am an active reader. I have a lot of empathy for those who are trying to make a living selling books. I don't believe that it is the copyright, the challenge that is preventing them from making a lot of money. We see this creeping from Amazon's publishing model and the impact that it's having on them. There are a lot of levers that are involved in whether or not an author is able to make money off that. It is not solely because a user does not have, there's not enough user rights to this. We need to be able to give a bigger audience so that users are able to use and participate, especially in the area of textbooks, where student costs are extraordinarily high and the textbook costs are not increasing at the same rate as that as an author, as a novel. So it's important to differentiate between those two.
Okay.
I would agree with Kelsey and echo what she's saying, and I think that what we're seeing is that a lot of the problem that we're seeing is not a copyright issue. It's the power dynamics between creators, the publishing industry, and where those revenues are going. When we look at some of the larger companies that are in control of these issues, they're doing fine. Their revenues are doing very well. And so a lot of this comes down to the power for creators to leverage in their contracts and their negotiations a stronger position for themselves to make sure that they have ways and avenues and venues, whether that's publishing through Creative Commons, whether that's publishing independently and through different avenues, to make sure that they can be compensated, and they should be compensated for their work. But I would agree that I don't think this is a matter of copyright infringement or copyright rules not being stringent enough to ensure they're compensated. I think that's actually the marketplace and the way that it's constructed to prevent them from being adequately compensated.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Longfield. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. It's a very technical discussion we're having in a very short period of time. I wanted to swing down to Mr. Petricone, and again, thanks for meeting with us when we were in Washington. I'm wondering whether you've seen some of the same discussions around the revenue share between creators and the providers of technology in the States, have the creators in the States had the same kind of drop in revenue that we've seen in Canada?
It depends on how you want to measure. One aspect of these new technologies is that they change the revenue stream. So not only may there be more or less revenue coming in, but it's also going to different groups. But there is some good news. According to the RIA, the Recording Industry Association of America, first half revenues in the music industry in the United States are up 10% to $4.6 billion. And most notably, for us, 75% of those revenues come from streaming music. So, clearly the music industry went through a period of disruption with new technology, and that is not uncommon. But now what they're doing is meeting the consumer's needs, because consumers want streaming music. They want to be able to listen to their music anywhere in a variety of devices. And now the record labels are enabling that, and the revenue is coming in. So I think that the picture actually looks, as we get through this period of transition, the period looks quite bright.
So is that something that the technology companies are doing voluntarily, or did you have change in legislation or regulations in the States around how streaming is handled?
Well, we just passed a law in the United States called the Music Modernization Act, which basically streamlines how digital music is paid for, and incorporates pre-1972 music into our system, because before it was a state by state policy, which was unhelpful if you're trying to run a national business. But I think what has become emblematic of the entire debate, the passage of the Music Modernization Act was not only bipartisan in Congress, but also included all the stakeholders, record labels, publishers, artists, streaming platforms. So I think there's a growing realization, and at first when the new technology came out, it was quite adversarial and fractious. But I think there's a growing realization that we are all part of the same ecosystem, and if the ecosystem is healthy, we all benefit.
So we've been trying to get some witnesses from the American streaming services to testify at our committee. We're still in the fractious state, I think, in Canada. The creators are getting paid fractions of pennies per stream. They need millions and millions of streams to try and make up for lost revenue. So there was a pivot point at some point in the discussion in the States. How long ago was that?
I think it has been gradual as consumers have been adopting streaming music.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's definitely something that we need to include in our study. And on the open media, we've had a lot of conflicting testimony, and which is why we do these things. We don't want everybody agreeing, but I'm wondering where you would sit in terms of the protection of revenue for creators when you look at, let's say, things like resale right, or reversionary right for copyright to go back to the artist after a set amount of time, or granting journalists remuneration rights, so people that are using photos, as an example, that revenue used to go to the original photographer. How does that fit in terms of the openness that you're describing to us today?
I'm not familiar with the details of all of the proposals that you put forward, but I would say, generally speaking, as I said earlier, we do believe that creators should be compensated. I think that if there are copyrighted images that are being passed around by journalists that have had their content, they should make sure that that's being used fairly and appropriately. I think that there are a number of challenges in making sure that creators are compensated. And I think that what we're looking at is trying to find ways that, and specifically the angle we're coming for, is making sure that people are able to access the content that they are interested in and that they want, whether that is through the ability to legally license that through streaming services, whether that's through paid news sources that they're accessing content because it's something that matters to them, making sure that that is available. So I don't know if there's a specific proposal within there you'd like me to dig in on a little more to see how it fits against the openness.
Yeah, I think the chair's looking down, so he isn't looking at the clock right now. I'm over time.
I also have a comment.
But there's a lot I could dig in, but unfortunately I don't have the time. But thank you for your testimony.
I was ignoring you so that you could keep going. But, okay, we're going to move over to Mr. Lloyd. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'm going to kind of move on to Ms. Tribe, because I was going to ask you a question, and you've kind of talked at length about the USMCA or the NAFTA 2.0 agreement, and its impacts on this copyright study, because I mean it's a very fluid environment, and I'm just wondering if you had any comments on, in terms of this study, any recommendations that we should have in light of the context of the new NAFTA agreement to promote users' rights in the context of the deal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the number one thing that we think is we need to actually expand what fair dealing looks like and fair use to bring more balance to that. Our concerns with what was agreed to in the USMCA is that it shifts into a more heavy-handed copyright regime without providing anything for users in exchange. And so what we're really looking for is expanding fair dealing, potentially adopting the U.S. model of fair use to just broaden it more wholeheartedly. Maria, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add on things you'd be asking for.
The only thing I would add is that we would definitely want to keep our notice and notice system as opposed to taking the U.S. notice and takedown system, which is a lot more restrictive. However, as I mentioned in my part of the testimony, we can definitely tweak the notice and notice system, especially in terms of like the language in the notices and the settlement fees, as well as the kind of like some of the more technical aspects and the ways in which ISPs are asked to deal with these notices, which can be very burdensome.
Now, you mentioned heavy-handed. Can you give us some examples of heavy-handedness?
I think looking at the copyright term extensions is a good example. We are hearing a lot of arguments here, and we're discussing a lot of ways that creators need to be compensated. Extending copyright terms from 50 to 70 years after the life of an artist does not compensate that artist. We're talking about creators that are looking to be paid now, and that's a lot of challenges. But extending it from 50 to 70 years after their death harms the public. That harms people that are no longer able to access that information in the public domain for another 20 years. So we will have a 20-year period in Canada where no new content enters the public domain once this deal is adopted, without any real justification for how that's going to help people in Canada. Kelsey, did you want to add something?
Well, but isn't that the consensus around the world, though, that 70 years after the death of the author?
We are seeing that definitely move towards that. I'm just going to
Sorry?
The standard is 50. We're seeing it increasingly move to 70 with pressure from the United States.
Where is the standard 50?
International Berne Convention, which is like an international
the Berne Convention.
Every European country 70, every America's 70. So which countries are we talking?
The Berne Convention is where it is 50, and we're seeing it increasingly move to 70, particularly with pressure from the United States.
At this point, it is really like Russia, the U.S., and now Canada.
One thing I thought was interesting is how Europe has been, Europe's being used as an example for how open they are on these things, but we're also seeing Europe as sort of like the front runner pioneer on content filters and things like that. So can you comment? It seems that there's like kind of two emerging different streams of thought coming out of Europe. One, that they're very open to using new technologies to crack down on copyright infringement, but then your testimony is saying that Europe is somehow more open. So do you have comments on that?
I mean, I think trying to loop Europe into one viewpoint is like trying to loop every person testifying at this committee into one perspective. There's a lot of diverse approaches, and I think the concern that we do have in Europe is that there is a lot of pressure from individuals. We're hearing from people in our community and a lot of creator groups that the copyright directive that is being proposed through both the link tax and the censorship machines that are being put forward in Articles 11 and 13 are heavy-handed. So there's, I think, a distinction between the policy proposals that are being put forward and what people are looking for and asking for, and I think that's where the division is. So I think that that tension does very much exist. There's a lot of pressure from publisher groups to adopt these stricter regulations, but at the same time, a lot of pushback, because not only are these proposals that will greatly infringe the openness of the internet in Europe, but they will have larger international implications.
Interesting. Yeah, because like we've been talking about publishers, and it's like this, everyone thinks it's just this monolithic industry, but like I've got a publisher in Edmonton who came and met with me, and he's like, the only reason I'm profitable this year is because I haven't taken any salary for myself. And like we're seeing lots of publishers, especially Canadian publishers, who are struggling. So like, how does increasing users' rights, how is that going to help Canadian publishers compete in a world where American publishers and European publishers have more rights and are more competitive than our publishers are?
I think that we need to make sure that those publishers are able to reach the audiences that can and will pay for that content. And I think that the proposals we've seen put forward through content filtering, through website blocking, do the exact opposite of that. They make it even harder for content to reach users. And so in addition to making sure that we are promoting that content and making sure it's available, we have to distribute it. We have to make sure it gets into the hands of as many people as possible in the ways where they can pay for it, where it's easy. And I think that's really, we've seen this across so many different issues, but I really think fundamentally that's the tension between fair play as an example and the alternatives, is that we're not going to get people to go back to paying for cable TV. You have to make content available in the way people want it, in the formats they want it. So how can we facilitate and support Canadian businesses, Canadian publishers in getting their content created, produced in the hands of the ways that people want to actually touch it, and make sure that we're supporting those industries to reach those audiences? Because if those audiences are there, we have seen it. We've seen it with subscription services. People will pay, and they do as soon as it's easy. And so how do we support Canadian publishers to do that?
Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Ms. Cesar Chavan. You have 5 minutes.
So thank you very much to each of the witnesses. I really appreciated some of your testimony today. I'm going to pick up from where you left off on the last question. And in this copyright review, I'm kind of torn between the testimony that I've heard in terms of we need to make amendments versus is this the right place to help people increase their revenue streams or increase their ability to access different markets for their products. So my question is to each of you, whoever feels like answering it, do we increase competition or increase access through amendments to the Copyright Act, or is it required that our artists, our creators change their business model to be able to access different markets and create that increase in revenue, which is currently not happening, and we've seen the decline?
It looked like Michael wanted to speak. Sorry, I wasn't sure if...
Not all at once, guys.
Michael, did you want to speak?
Whenever you're
It looked like Michael wanted to speak, so I just wanted to.
I will just add one thing, and I think it's not, it may be both, and certainly creators will hopefully take advantage, change their business model to take advantage of new technologies and the abilities to monetize and reach larger audiences, right? And that's a good thing. I think the one thing that I would caution is that, certainly it's a goal of this committee to broaden competition among internet platforms, right? That's a good thing, and the whole startup ecosystem is very dynamic and provides more opportunities for artists and creators. The route that Europe is taking with these regulations, such as Article 11 and Article 13, while well intended, may have the opposite effect in concentrating the power of larger companies, just because some of the regimes, like the filtering regimes that are being mandated, are really, really expensive and resource intensive. I know if you look at YouTube's Content ID as an example, they spent $60 million on that. So those may be mandates and obligations that larger companies are able to meet, but for somebody who's creating a new company in her dorm room but has to meet the same kind of obligations, she cannot. And that's the kind of result I think that we need to be mindful and careful of.
Yeah, I agree with my colleague's statements, and also want to echo that we are seeing shifts in business models, which is challenging across, and there was a comment that was brought up earlier about the Betamax. There's a company in the US called OpenStax, which is a for-profit publishing company, which releases their textbooks through an open license, but is able to make quite a substantial amount of money and increases jobs. And also the example I referenced in my testimony, Lumen Learning, which is also a for-profit entity, which still allows some aspects of open educational content, which does reach the most marginalized students and is reaching out. So again, I want to iterate that it's important to separate the creators of novels from those who are making textbooks. And I wanted to make a point that I was trying to make earlier around creators reclaiming their rights. Artist Billy Joel, who many of us know and love, has said that he will no longer create any new music as a result of overreaching copyright in the U.S. and the deals that he has with the record companies. So we are just not we are in that complicated place right now where we need both new business models for these creators and also some regulation to help us get through this time.
Very good. My subsequent question is around the 5-year review. So with the speed of which the digital age is changing, it seems like, in my opinion, perhaps I'll keep it to just being my opinion, but it seems like a 5-year review is too slow, or perhaps too slow. And what do you say to that, knowing the challenges that the industry currently faces? We're doing a 5-year review. We're all sitting here providing input, and by the time legislation comes out, hey, things might change. So is a 5-year review relevant?
I would say that Open Media doesn't have an official position on this, but
Just throwing it out
my
there.
opinion to your opinion, I think that we are 5 years now, almost 6 years in, since this has been another year since the 5-year period, and we are debating actually quite small nuances within the Copyright Act itself. Overall, it's held up for 5 years, and I think a lot of that is a reflection of the thought that went into making this something that will last, and I think that's the challenge that I would extend to this committee, is recognizing that this does need to last. This is not something that can exist just on the ecosystem we have right now. We cannot predict the future, so how do we try and make these pieces of legislation as future-proof as possible to be flexible for the new technologies that come up as well as the new challenges that arise? And that's a big challenge, and you have a large task in front of you.
Yes, we know. That's it? That's it? That's it? And now for the final 2 minutes of the day, Mr. Massey, take it home.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to finish with Mr. Lipkiss. It appears that we can't do any regulatory changes to what there's no shortcut there in terms of maybe low-hanging fruit. The researchers have come back to me with that advice so far. But real quickly, if we do not get the legislation table, because this is a review, and what would be the simple things that we could do immediately right now, because there could be an election most likely before any tabling of legislation, because we'd have to get it back from the minister, from the review, and it'd have to go through the Senate and so forth. Really quickly, what are the things that we could do in the short term?
Articles that are produced by the Canadian government, publicly available immediately on publication, either through a Creative Commons license or releasing it to a public domain.
On my end, I would say reject Fair Play Canada's website blocking proposal, at least as part of this review. Thank you.
Mr. Lucas, is there any?
I'm not sure, other than what we
Okay.
talked about, that you can do something without legislation.
Okay. And any advice from Washington there?
Yes, enable innovators, enable startups. That's where the dynamism comes from, and avoid website blocking.
Okay. Thank you very much and for your patience as you've been away.
Blocking.
That's it, Mr. Chair.
That'll do it?
Yep.
Wow, look at that. I want to thank everybody for coming in today. As you know, we have quite the task ahead of us. There's conflicting stories on either side, and our task, as well as the task of our great analysts, who will help guide us to where we need to go, and then we'll blame them later. But yeah, we have definitely been hearing a lot of good information, and we'll look forward to putting it all together. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming in. Thank you, Michael from Washington, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
So yeah, the situation right now.